Some families are a safe harbor, a place you can always return to, knowing you'll be met with open arms. Mine was a courtroom. From the day I was born, I was on trial, and the verdict was always the same: guilty of not being my brother. They measured worth in dollars, in job titles, in the gleam of a new car. I measured it in shades of charcoal and the rough texture of a fresh canvas. This is the story of how I stopped trying to win my case in their courtroom, and instead built a world so magnificent they weren't even allowed a ticket to the viewing. The weight of being told you're not enough, especially by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, is a special kind of poison. It seeps into your bones and whispers lies to you in the dead of night. If you've ever felt that chill, ever fought to hear your own voice over the chorus of doubt, then this story is for you. Stay with me and I'll tell you how I found the antidote. And if you find a piece of your own story in mine, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps prove that stories about building yourself up from the rubble deserve to be heard. Now, let's go back to the house where the silence was more damning than the shouting. Our house wasn't a home. It was a stage. It sat on the most desirable street in our small, suffocating town of Northwood, a two-story colonial with pristine white siding and perpetually manicured lawns. Every object inside it was carefully chosen to project an image of effortless success. My mother, Eleanor, curated our lives the same way she curated the living room. Everything had its place, and anything that didn't fit the aesthetic was hidden away. I was the hand-drawn sketch in a house full of framed oil paintings. I didn't fit. My father, Richard, was a man built of booming opinions and financial statements. He was a partner at a regional accounting firm, and he saw the world through the lens of a balance sheet. Assets and liabilities, profits and losses. His love was an investment, and you had to show a significant return to be worthy of it. And then there was Daniel, my older brother, the golden boy. Daniel was my father's masterpiece and my mother's pride. He did everything right. He got straight A's in subjects that mattered, like calculus and economics. He went to a prestigious university, got a job as a financial analyst straight out of college, and by 25, was driving a German sedan that cost more than my entire future tuition. He was their proof to the world that they had succeeded as parents. His every achievement was announced at dinner parties, discussed over golf games, and relayed in my mother's annual Christmas letter with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious texts. My achievements were different. I could capture the exact way the afternoon light hit the dust motes in my bedroom with a piece of charcoal. I could draw a portrait of our neighbor's tired, kindly face that showed every laugh line and worry crease. I filled sketchbooks with designs for chairs that looked like unfurling leaves and rooms that felt like secret gardens. These things to me were magic. They were the most real and vital parts of who I was. In the house of glass they were invisible. Worse, they were liabilities. Dinner was the main stage for our family drama. We would sit at the long, polished mahogany table, the clinking of my mother's silverware the only sound for long stretches. These silences were never comfortable. They were moments for judgment, for assessment. I remember one evening with painful clarity. I was 17, on the cusp of deciding my future. Daniel, home for a visit, was holding court, detailing a recent complex stock portfolio he had managed for a wealthy client. My father was leaning forward, his eyes alight with pride, hanging on every word. My mother was smiling, a tight, satisfied little smile that said, "This is my son." When Daniel finished, a pleased silence fell over the table. To fill it, I excitedly pulled a new sketch from my bag. It was a design for a public library, with soaring glass walls and cozy reading nooks built into the shelves. I had spent weeks on it. "I was thinking of submitting this to the state's Young Architect competition," I said, my voice trembling slightly with a mixture of nerves and hope. My mother picked it up, holding it by the very edges as if it were contaminated. She glanced at it for no more than 2 seconds. "Again with your little drawings, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with a weary disappointment that was far more painful than outright anger. She placed it back on the table, pushing it slightly away from her. "It's a lovely hobby, I suppose. But artists starve. Normal people make money." "Look at Daniel," my father boomed, gesturing with his fork at my brother, who was now examining his perfect fingernails with a bored expression. "He's 25 and he's already putting a down payment on a condo downtown. You're almost 18 and you don't even have a proper summer job because you're too busy scribbling in that notebook." "It's not scribbling," I said, my voice small, the heat of shame crawling up my neck. It's design. It's a career. People build careers out of this." Daniel finally looked up, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Sure. Maybe you can design a really nice cardboard box to live in. I hear the market for those is pretty stable among the homeless." My father chuckled. My mother just sighed, that long-suffering sound that made me feel like I was a burden she was forced to carry. "You're just not realistic, Emily," she said. "This family is respected in this town. We have a reputation. Your brother enhances that reputation. Your fantasies do not." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I looked around the table at the three of them, a united front of disapproval. They were a closed circle, and I was on the outside, my face pressed against the glass, begging to be let in. The final fracture happened a few months later, during a parent-teacher conference. My art teacher, a wonderful, eccentric woman named Mrs. Gable, had raved about my portfolio. She called my work visionary, and told my parents I had a rare and marketable talent. She strongly recommended I apply to some of the best design schools in the country. I sat there, my heart soaring. Finally, another adult, a professional, was validating everything I felt. Maybe now they would see. On the car ride home, the silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. I waited, vibrating with anticipation, for them to say something, anything positive. My father was the first to speak, his eyes fixed on the road. "Visionary. What a ridiculous word. She's a high school art teacher. What does she know about the real world?" "It was frankly embarrassing, Emily," my mother added from the passenger seat, turning to look at me, her face a mask of cold fury. Listening to her go on and on while the Martins were in the hallway waiting to talk about their son's early acceptance into the Wharton School of Business. "Do you have any idea how that makes us look?" "But she said I had talent," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "She said I could get scholarships." "Talent doesn't pay the mortgage," my father roared, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. Daniel understood that. He sacrificed. He worked. He didn't waste his time on pipe dreams. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" "Because I'm not him," I screamed, tears finally breaking free and streaming down my face. "I don't want to be him. I want to be me." "Why is that such a disappointment to you?" My mother turned around fully in her seat, her eyes like chips of ice. She didn't shout. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. "Because you," she said, her voice low and precise, "are a disgrace to this family." Disgrace. The word didn't just hurt. It landed in my gut and detonated, shattering something deep inside me. It was the final verdict. I was guilty. There would be no appeal. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, in my perfectly decorated, perfectly joyless room, and that word echoed in the darkness. Disgrace. 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 I looked around at the life they had built for me, a gilded cage of expectations I could never meet. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that I had to leave. I couldn't spend one more day in that courtroom, begging for an acquittal that would never come. Packed a single suitcase. I took my sketchbooks, a few changes of clothes, and the $300 I had saved from selling a few portraits. I wrote a short, simple note and left it on my pillow. It said, "I'm going to find a world where I fit." As the sun began to cast a pale gray light over the manicured lawns of Northwood, I slipped out the front door. I didn't look back. Every step I took away from that house of glass was a step towards an unknown, terrifying future. But for the first time in my life, it felt like a future that might actually be my own. The bus ride out of Northwood felt like an escape from a sinking ship. With every mile that passed, the manicured lawns and identical houses of my hometown blurred into a green and brown smear, and the weight on my chest began to lift, replaced by the terrifying, intoxicating fizz of pure, unadulterated freedom. But freedom, I was about to learn, has a price. And it's usually paid in cash, which I had precious little of. I arrived in the city, a sprawling, anonymous beast of concrete, steel, and noise, with a suitcase in one hand and a crumpled piece of paper with a classified ad in the other. The city wasn't the romantic, inspiring metropolis I had dreamed of. It was overwhelming. The sheer number of people, the relentless symphony of sirens and traffic, the feeling of being a tiny, insignificant speck in a vast, indifferent universe. It was a shock to my system. The small room I had arranged to rent was in a run-down building that smelled of damp clothes and stale cooking oil. My room was little more than a closet with a window that offered a breathtaking view of a graffiti-covered brick wall. The paint on the walls was peeling, the single mattress dipped precariously in the middle, and the radiator hissed and clanked like a dying animal. This was it. This was my new palace. I remember sitting on the edge of that lumpy mattress, the sounds of the city pressing in on me, and feeling a wave of panic so intense it made me dizzy. The voices of my parents echoed in my head, louder and more insistent than ever. Artists starve. You'll come crawling back. Disgrace. For a terrifying moment I thought they might be right. I spent the first week in a frantic, desperate search for work. My portfolio of designs was useless when it came to paying rent. The real world, as my father would have gleefully pointed out, required practical skills. I finally landed a job as a waitress at a greasy spoon diner called The Daily Grind. It was as charming as it sounded. My life fell into a grueling, monotonous rhythm. I'd wake up before dawn, my back aching from the terrible mattress. I'd work a 10-hour shift, slinging hash browns and coffee, my feet screaming in protest. I'd come home stinking of bacon grease and burnt coffee, my pockets heavy with a few dollars in tips. I'd eat instant noodles for dinner, standing over the tiny sink in my room. And then, when the exhaustion was a physical weight on my body, I would open my sketchbook. That sketchbook was my sanctuary. It was the only place where I was in control, the only place where the world made sense. Under the weak light of a cheap desk lamp, while the city hummed and screamed outside my window, I would draw. I designed furniture, I mapped out floor plans for imaginary clients. I filled pages and pages with ideas. It was the one act that reminded me of who I was, beyond the stained apron and the tired, aching muscles. But the doubt was a constant companion. There were nights I'd stare at a blank page for hours, my mind a wasteland of fear and insecurity. The parental chorus in my head would reach a crescendo. You have no talent. You're wasting your time. You're a failure. One particularly bleak evening, after a customer had yelled at me for mixing up his order and I'd been shorted on my tips, I actually picked up the phone to call home. My finger hovered over Daniel's number. I could practically hear his smug voice. So, had enough of playing the starving artist yet, Em? Dad and I were just talking about how long it would take for you to give up. The thought of giving him that satisfaction was the only thing that stopped me. I slammed the phone down, my hand shaking. I would not give them the victory. I would rather starve. And I came close. There were weeks when I lived on nothing but peanut butter and day-old bread from the bakery next to the diner. I got frighteningly thin. My clothes, once stylish, became worn and shabby. I was perpetually tired, with dark circles under my eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. I was utterly, completely alone. The first glimmer of hope came from the most unexpected place. A woman who was a regular at the diner, a kind-faced graphic designer named Maria, would often see me sketching in my notepad during my short breaks. One day she asked to see my work. I was hesitant, my parents' dismissive faces flashing in my mind, but I showed her. She flipped through the pages slowly, her expression unreadable. I held my breath, bracing for the inevitable polite dismissal. Instead, she looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Honey," she said, "this is not a hobby. This is a gift. Have you ever done any freelance work?" That one conversation changed everything. Maria didn't just offer me validation. She offered me a lifeline. She taught me how to create a digital portfolio. She connected me with a small online platform for freelance creatives. And through it I got my first client. It was a tiny job, designing a new menu and a logo for a local coffee shop. The pay was a laughable $50. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that someone was willing to pay me even a small amount for my ideas. I poured my soul into that project. I spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting the design, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. The day I walked past that coffee shop and saw my logo, a stylized steaming cup formed from the branches of a tree, hanging in the window, I burst into tears right there on the sidewalk. It was real. I had made something, and it existed in the world outside of my sketchbook. It was a small, insignificant thing to anyone else, but to me it was a monument. It was proof that I wasn't invisible. That $50 job led to another, slightly bigger one. Then another. I started building a small, fragile reputation for being creative, fast, and cheap. I was still waitressing, still living in that horrible room, but now there was a sliver of light at the end of the tunnel. The dream wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It had a pulse. The universe, however, had one more test for me. Daniel called. It was a Tuesday night. I was hunched over my tiny desk, working on a project, when my phone buzzed with his name. My stomach instantly tied itself in knots. "Hey, Em," he said. His voice slick with that familiar condescending warmth. "Just calling to see if you're still alive. Dad's been making jokes about you joining a circus." "I'm fine, Daniel," I said, my voice tight. "You sure about that? Because I heard you're working at some greasy spoon. Mom is having an absolute fit, you know. She can't even go to her bridge club without someone asking about her bohemian daughter. It's pretty embarrassing for them." I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of my desk. "Breathe, Emily. Just breathe. Listen," he continued, his tone shifting to one of mock sincerity. "I get it. You had to get this little artistic rebellion out of your system. But it's been almost a year. Don't you think it's time to come home? Dad might even be able to get you an entry-level admin job at his firm. Real work, you know." That was it. The implication that my work, my passion, the thing I was sacrificing everything for, wasn't real work. The rage that had been simmering inside me for a year finally boiled over. "No, Daniel," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not coming home. And for the record, I'm not just a waitress. I'm a designer. I have my own clients." He laughed. A short, sharp, barking laugh that cut me to the bone. "Clients? Who are you kidding? Designing a flyer for a pizza place doesn't make you a designer. It's time to grow up." "You'll see," I whispered after he hung up, the words a promise to the empty room. "I'll show all of you." That phone call was a turning point. It solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. The struggle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving them wrong. But as I sat there, looking at the half-finished project on my screen, a new, more terrifying thought emerged. What if he was right? What if I was just kidding myself? I had a handful of tiny clients and a mountain of debt. My dream felt impossibly far away. It was me against the world, and for the first time I truly understood how alone I was. But as I picked up my pencil, I felt a flicker of defiance. If I was going to fail, I was going to fail on my own terms, reaching for the sky, not crawling back to their perfectly polished floor. The fire that Daniel's phone call lit under me burned away the last vestiges of my self-pity. The struggle became my fuel. Every long shift at the diner, every meal of instant noodles, was a down payment on my future. The condescending laughter in my memory became a silent, relentless motivator. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was building a case. A case for my own worth, brick by meticulous brick. My first significant project, the one that felt like a real step up the ladder, was designing the interior for a small tech startup. I got the job by a fluke. Their original designer had dropped out, and the CEO, a regular at the diner, had seen Maria praising my sketches. He offered me the job with a tight budget and an impossible deadline. I said yes without a moment's hesitation. For the next 2 months I barely slept. I quit the diner, A terrifying leap of faith that meant I was now living entirely off my savings and the project's small advance. My life became a whirlwind of paint swatches, furniture catalogs, and late-night calls with contractors. I learned on the fly, making mistakes, fixing them, and learning more. I wasn't just a girl who could draw anymore. I was a project manager, a negotiator, a problem solver. I discovered a toughness in myself I never knew I had. The day the project was finished, I walked through the completed office space alone after everyone had left. The light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the clean lines of the furniture I had chosen, the bold splash of color on the accent wall I had fought for, the custom-built communal tables designed to foster collaboration. It was everything I had imagined it could be. It was my vision made real. Seeing my sketches transformed into a tangible, functional, beautiful space. It was a feeling more potent than any praise my family could have ever given me. The startup's office got a small feature on a local design blog. It wasn't Vogue, but it was a start. In the article, they called my design innovative and budget-conscious. I cut out the article and taped it to the peeling wall of my tiny room. It was my first trophy. One project led to another. Word of mouth began to spread. You need a great design but don't have a huge budget. Call Emily. I developed a reputation for being a creative force who understood the practical constraints of the real world. I used my own experience of living in small, poorly designed spaces to inform my work. I became obsessed with creating spaces that were not just beautiful, but also smart, functional, and soulful. I wanted to create the feeling of home for others that I had never felt myself. After 2 years of relentless work, I had saved enough money to make my next big move. I rented a small, dusty loft in an industrial part of the city and officially opened Emily Vance Design. The studio was nothing more than a large room with a drafting table, a second-hand computer, and a leaky ceiling, but it was mine. The name on the door, in simple, elegant lettering I had designed myself, was a declaration of independence. Being my own boss was both liberating and terrifying. There were moments of sheer panic, like when a major client was 3 months late on a payment and I didn't know how I was going to make rent. There were difficult clients who treated me like a glorified servant, changing their minds on a whim and expecting me to read their minds. In those moments, the voices of my parents would creep back in. You're in over your head. You're not a real businesswoman. But every time I would look at the name on my studio door and push through, I was no longer the girl who needed their approval. I was the woman who signed the paychecks. I started using social media to showcase my work. I took professional-looking photos of my completed projects and posted them with detailed descriptions of my process. My account began to gain a following, first a few hundred, then a few thousand. People were drawn to my story. The transformation of drab, lifeless spaces into vibrant, personal sanctuaries. I wasn't just selling design. I was selling the idea that your environment could change your life. The real turning point, the moment that catapulted me from a small-time local designer to a name on the national stage, came in the form of a competition. A major design magazine announced a contest to find the country's best, up-and-coming interior designer. The grand prize was a feature spread in their magazine and a cash prize that could fund my studio for a year. The odds were astronomical. I was competing against established designers with huge teams and massive budgets. I almost didn't enter. The fear of failure, of public humiliation, was immense. But then I thought of my father's booming voice. Talent doesn't pay the mortgage. I thought of my mother's icy stare. You're a disgrace. I thought of Daniel's mocking laughter. I spent the next month pouring every ounce of my being into my submission. I documented my most challenging and innovative project, the transformation of a cramped, dark apartment into a light-filled, multifunctional living space. I didn't just submit photos. I submitted a story. Weeks went by and I heard nothing. I had almost forgotten about it, assuming my application had been tossed into a slush pile when I got the email. It was short and to the point. I had been selected as one of the 3 finalists. I had to present my portfolio in person to a panel of judges in New York City. The presentation was the most nerve-wracking experience of my life. I stood in a sleek, intimidating boardroom in front of three of the biggest names in the design world. But as I started talking about my work, my philosophy, my passion for creating spaces that made people feel seen, the nerves melted away. I wasn't trying to impress them. I was simply telling them my truth. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered a thick, heavy package to my studio. Inside was the latest issue of the magazine. And on the cover, in bold letters, was the headline, "The Visionary of Small Spaces, How Emily Vance is Revolutionizing Urban Design." I had won. I stood there, in the middle of my dusty studio, and just sobbed. They were not tears of sadness or relief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated vindication. They had used the word. Mrs. Gable's word. Visionary. The magazine feature was an avalanche. My phone didn't stop ringing. My inbox was flooded. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of Emily Vance design. And then came the call that would change my life forever. It was from the development group for the Onyx Collection, a new line of ultra-luxury boutique hotels. They had seen the article. They wanted me to design the interior for their flagship hotel. It was a multi-million-dollar contract. It was the kind of project designers spend their entire careers dreaming of. As my name began to appear in magazines and my work was featured on popular design websites, I sometimes wondered if my family had seen it. Did they know? Did they care? A part of me, the wounded 17-year-old girl, still craved their acknowledgement. But the woman I had become knew better. I wasn't doing it for them anymore. I was doing it for me. The ultimate poetic irony came in the mail about a year later, as the hotel project was nearing completion. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with an embossed seal. It was an invitation from the National Design Council. They were hosting their annual awards gala, and I was to be honored with the Innovator of the Year award for my contribution to modern design. As I read the details, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. The ceremony, of all places, was being held in a newly renovated event center in my hometown of Northwood. I held the invitation in my hand, the heavy cardstock feeling like a weapon. 4 years my plan for revenge had been simple. Succeed. Live well. Be so successful that my very existence was a rebuke to their judgment. But now the universe was offering me something more. Stage. An audience. A final public curtain call on the family drama I had left behind. Had to go back. It was time for the courtroom to reconvene, but this time I wouldn't be the one on trial. Returning to Northwood was like stepping into a photograph from a life I no longer lived. The town was exactly as I had left it. The same pristine storefronts, the same manicured lawns, the same palpable sense of quiet judgment hanging in the air. But I was different. The timid, heartbroken girl who had fled on a pre-dawn bus was gone. In her place was a woman who had built her own world from scratch, a woman who knew her own worth down to the last screw and nail. I checked into the new event center's hotel, the very venue where the gala was being held. The irony was not lost on me. 10 years ago, I couldn't have afforded a cup of coffee in a place like this. Now I walked through the lobby, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor, and I felt a sense of belonging I had earned, not inherited. The evening of the awards ceremony, I took my time getting ready. I had chosen my outfit with the precision of an architect designing a facade. It was a simple, elegant black gown, a piece of architectural art in its own right, with clean lines and a dramatic silhouette. It was the kind of dress that didn't need flashy jewelry or elaborate styling. It was a statement of quiet, unshakable confidence. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw not just a designer, but a survivor. The ghosts of my parents' criticisms felt distant, their voices like faint static from a long-lost radio station. Walking into the ballroom was a surreal experience. It was filled with the movers and shakers of Northwood society, the very people my parents had spent their lives trying to impress. Heads turned as I entered. There were whispers. I saw people I had gone to high school with, people who had known me as the weird, artsy girl, now looking at me with a mixture of confusion and awe. And then I saw them. My parents and Daniel. They were standing near the bar, looking out of place, almost nervous. My father's booming confidence seemed to have shrunk. My mother's perfectly composed face was tight with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Daniel, my smug, self-assured brother, just looked ordinary. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that in this room, filled with genuine creators and innovators, he was just another man who moved money around. They saw me. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, a gesture I knew meant she was flustered. My father straightened his tie. They started to move towards me, but at that moment, the master of ceremonies called for everyone to take their seats. Saved by the bell. I sat at the head table, a guest of honor. They were seated somewhere in the back, relegated to the role of spectators. Throughout the dinner, I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't look at them. I chatted with the designers and architects at my table. I laughed, I engaged. I was in my element, surrounded by my people. They were outsiders here, just as I had always been in their world. When my name was called for the Innovator of the Year award, the applause was thunderous. I walked towards the stage, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. As I passed my family's table, I caught my mother's eye. The look on her face was a tangled mess of shock, pride, and something that looked terrifyingly like regret. I stood at the podium, the heavy, beautifully designed trophy in my hand. I looked out at the sea of faces, a spotlight warming my skin, and I found them again in the crowd. My family, a jury. They were leaning forward, waiting. This was the moment. The daughter they had written off was on stage, being celebrated, and they were desperate to be included in the narrative. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and strong, echoing through the silent hall. "I've learned that design isn't just about making things beautiful. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe, where they feel valued, where they feel seen for who they truly are." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I want to thank my mentors who taught me the craft. I want to thank my clients who trusted me with their dreams. And I want to thank every single person who ever looked at one of my little drawings and saw not a hobby, but a possibility. Thank my team. I thanked the awards committee. I thanked Mrs. Gable by name, who was in the audience and beaming with tears in her eyes. I did not thank my family. The omission was a gaping hole in my speech, a silence more profound and damning than any accusation I could ever have leveled. I had written them out of my story, just as they had tried to write me out of theirs. After the ceremony, I was swarmed by well-wishers. As I was talking to a journalist from a national paper, I felt a tentative tap on my arm. Turned. It was my mother. My father and Daniel hovered awkwardly behind her. "Emily," she said, her voice strained, trying to sound casual. "That was quite a speech. We always knew you were talented." Her words hit me, and not with the force I had expected. There was no anger, no satisfying sting of victory. There was just nothing. They were hollow words, a desperate last-minute attempt to rewrite history, to claim a piece of the success they had never supported. I looked at her, at this woman who had broken my heart 1,000 times. And for the first time I saw her not as a monster, but as a small, frightened person, terrified of being on the wrong side of the balance sheet. I gave her a calm, serene smile. It was not a smile of forgiveness. It was a smile of dismissal. "No, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm, for her ears only. "You always knew only one thing, that I wasn't good enough for your world. But the thing is, I was never trying to fit into your world. I was building my own." I held her gaze for a moment longer, letting her absorb the finality of it. Then I said the words that would sever the cord for good. "And I finally know. I never had to prove my worth to you. I only ever had to prove it to myself." I turned my back on them. I didn't storm away. I simply turned back to the conversation I had been having, leaving them standing there in my wake. I left them behind with their outdated currency of status and reputation, realizing they had lost something far more valuable. They hadn't just lost their daughter. They had lost the right to stand in the light of her success. They were ghosts from a past I had finally outgrown. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I placed the heavy award on the desk. It gleamed in the soft light, a testament not to my victory over them, but to my victory over the insecure, frightened girl I used to be. The revenge wasn't the public triumph, or the final, cutting words. The real revenge was my peace. It was the silence in my own head, where their critical voices used to be. I had built a beautiful life, a beautiful world, and the only opinion that mattered anymore was my own. They say success is the best revenge. But I think that's incomplete. True revenge isn't about showing your success to the people who doubted you. It's about reaching a place where their opinion is so irrelevant, you forget to even check if they're watching. My family built a house of glass, designed to be looked at. I built a life of substance, designed to be lived in. And that has made all the difference. Thank you for being here with me today. If my story struck a chord, if you've ever had to build your own sense of worth against the odds, share your experience in the comments. I read them all. And please subscribe for more stories about taking back your own narrative. Because at the end of the day, you are the only architect of your own life. Build something magnificent.